and I would really hope that the police have gotten a grip on these gangs and stopped the next generation coming through, because too many lives have been lost, and we don't need any more lives lost in Sheffield needlessly like this. Well, the murder of Tarek was shocking for a number of reasons really. He was only 17 when he was shot dead. It was broad daylight, it was outside a barber's shop. It was described as a Wild West style shooting. Tarek had a gun, his killer had a gun, and they opened fire. It was also shocking because Tarek was a member of what was known as a postcode gang back in the day. It was July 2008. But rather than being killed by a rival gang member, which you might have expected bearing in mind the life he used to lead, he was actually killed by one of his own.
And what can you tell us about the postcode gang you mentioned?
Yeah, so Tarek was a member of the S3 postcode gang. So that operated in a place called Pittsmore and neighbouring Burngreave. There was also another gang operating at that time, which was known as the S4 gang. And they were rivals, and there were a number of shootings and stabbings involving both those gangs. But on this occasion, when Tarek was killed, it was as a result of the S3 gang imploding. There were a number of different factions that had developed within that gang, and unfortunately Tarek ended up dead as a result of that. He'd been branded a traitor by some members of the S3 gang. They blamed him for passing on information which led to a serious stabbing. They held him responsible. So the S3 gang decided that Tarek would pay the price for passing on information, which led to another one of his gang members being stabbed. So what happened was that he himself was ambushed outside his home, stabbed multiple times, left fighting for his life. But he survived, and then a few days later he was ambushed again, but this time by gunmen, and he was shot dead in broad daylight, as I explained earlier. I was the crime reporter at the Star at the time, and I covered the case. It was quite high profile. What was really unusual and sticks in my mind was that Tarek's killers, when they were led away from the dock, they showed an absolute lack of remorse for what they'd done, and they actually started rapping as they were led away to begin their life sentences. So that really shocked me. Another unusual aspect of this case was that it was never proven in court who actually fired the gun which killed Tarek. There were 4 people on trial: Nigel Junior Ramsey, his brother Denzel Ramsey, his next door neighbour Leven Menzies, and a friend, Michael Chatu. So the prosecution say that Nigel Ramsey, the general, organised this killing. He was actually behind bars at the time for another offence. He used a smuggled mobile phone to plan the shooting, basically. He embroiled his brother, his next door neighbour and a friend, and the case against these 4 was that although we don't know who fired the gun, they were all involved, they all knew about it, they were therefore all guilty. They were sentenced to a total of 110 years between them. Yes, the atmosphere in court was very tense on the day they were sentenced. There were lots of people in the public gallery, 4 defendants in the dock, lots of friends, lots of family, and when they were found guilty and the lack of remorse they showed when they were led away, yeah, there were some quite unpleasant scenes in the gallery and outside afterwards. So at the end of the trial, the judge in the case said that although Britain isn't broken, they were the words used at the time, he said that certain communities were being plagued by the lawless activities of the likes of you, referring to the defendants, and gangs such as S3.
Are there any other linked cases or shootings that the gang have been involved with?
Yeah, so the S3 gang is quite notorious. This wasn't the first murder to have involved it. The month before, actually, a young man called Brett Blake, he was stabbed to death on the dance floor of a nightclub. It was called Unique Nightclub. It was on Carver Street, which is one of Sheffield's main party streets, full of pubs, clubs. Yes, he was stabbed to death on the dance floor by 2 other members of the S3 gang, again as a result of this gang imploding and all the different factions developing. So yeah, so 1 month before Tarek was shot dead, another S3 gang member was stabbed to death. The year before these 2 murders, a 16-year-old boy, Jonathan Matondo, also an S3 member, he was shot dead on a recreation ground in Burngreave. It was back in 2007 on the Nottingham Cliff recreation area in the middle of Burngreave, where children played day after day. Jonathan was here with his friends that night. His mum had gone to church. Jonathan had said he was going to the park. There'd been an incident earlier in the day where shots had been fired at Jonathan. Those shots missed him. Tragically, he was gunned down here. The police believe from a distance of around 60 feet, quite a considerable distance, probably the length of a basketball pitch, which is where Jonathan's body was found. On the day of the murder, this entire area, vast area, was cordoned off with police tape. There were police officers surrounding the recreation ground. There were armed police officers, loads of them patrolling the streets, driving around the streets. You couldn't get anywhere near for days. Eventually, when the park was reopened, this area here became a shrine. There were candles, floral tributes. All Jonathan's friends gathered here. The community came here in absolute shock at what had happened. And now as we look around the place today, 14, 15 years later, there's no tribute here, no formal tribute, but there's street art where Jonathan's name is enshrined on walls, on a piece of furniture on the park. You can be rest assured that he has never been forgotten in this area, and he never will be.
Gangland warfare, I guess, between S3 and S4 wasn't really public knowledge at the time. It wasn't a big story in Sheffield at the time, was
No, that's right. So it was not until Jonathan's murder that the S3-S4 feud became common knowledge. It was common knowledge in Burngreave and Pitsmoor, you know, residents living along it, you know, houses being shot at in their street, but for the man on the street elsewhere in Sheffield, they were unaware of it. What we did find strange was that when we went up to Burngreave in the immediate aftermath of the murder, residents up there were shocked because a young boy had died, but they weren't surprised. It was almost like this feud had been leading up to this. Unfortunately, this murder wasn't the last in this feud. There's been more incidents since then.
With these gangs in different areas of different cities and stuff like that, I think one of the things that is often shocking every time, no matter where in the country we have an incident like this, is the age of the people involved. What was the reaction, if you remember, to a teenager being shot in such a brutal way?
Back then people were horrified. You know, as a young child, 16-year-old, just left school, horrified that he could be killed like this. The police said at the time that they did think it was a targeted attack, that it was a ruthless and planned attack, but that was way after the initial press conference at the crime scene, where they just gave us the basics. Sheffield
was regarded as one of the safest cities in the country at that point, so it would have been a shock nationally for this sort of incident to take place.
It was. Sheffield had a reputation as one of the safest cities in the country, so this sent shockwaves across Sheffield, but also across the country. The Nationals, they were straight up here. You know, they wanted to know, you know, what had gone wrong, who was to blame, what was happening in Sheffield, what was changing, why was it changing. There were a lot of questions that needed answered.
What was, because obviously nobody's ever been convicted of Jonathan's murder, and so we don't have the usual, this is what happened, that we can use when somebody's been convicted in court, but police have their suspicions and a timeline of what they believe has happened from as to why and what happened. So what was that sort of belief and suspicions from the police?
Yeah, so one teenager stood trial twice over this murder. The first time the jury could not reach a verdict, the second time he was acquitted. But throughout both trials and to this day, the police belief is that Jonathan was killed in a retribution attack for previous incidents involving the S3 and S4 gang. The police claim that they have evidence that on the day of Jonathan's murder there was another attempt on his life. He was shot at again. On that occasion he wasn't hit, and the police believe that that was all to do with the fact that the night before a gun was fired at an S4 member's relative's house. So that's what they believe is at the root of this murder.
So where are the police at regarding this case?
Well, cases of this severity are never closed. There is a cold case review team at South Yorkshire Police. They examine unsolved murders, rapes, other serious cases. Should any new information ever come to light, they'll obviously investigate it. These cases are reviewed on a regular basis, and the police have always said that they never thought that just one person was responsible for this murder. They've always thought there was a group involved, so the potential is that eventually, one day, numerous people could eventually be brought to justice.